In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the lessons I learned looking for a four-leaf clover in my yard. And hopefully this will help you if you decide to go out look for four-leaf clovers. Then later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about odds and what those really mean. And then I'm going to go a little bit more into the background biology associated with four-leaf clovers and how this fits in with looking for them and the odds. So starting off, the first thing that I tried to do was an exhaustive search, that is looking at every single clover within a set confined area. And this turned out to be a mistake. It was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. It took a lot longer than I thought it should, and it didn't really pay off. The reason for this is because when you look at a typical yard with clovers in it, you tend to see the bigger leaves on the surface, but once you go below those, there's smaller ones below that, and then below that there's other layers and layer and layer, and they get smaller as you get closer to the ground. The ones closer to the ground are also intermixed with all the grass and everything else, so it becomes very difficult and time consuming to tease all of these apart. It is far quicker and easier, both physically and mentally, to just scan a particular area of the yard and see if you four-leaf clover within that particular area, and then just keep going and going that way. It may take a little longer, you may need a little bit more area to do this, but in the long run that seems to be far more effective, and it's a lot easier, which means you will keep doing it. Another thing to keep in mind is time of day. I didn't realize this beforehand, but later in the day, clover leaves actually tend to fold up a little bit, and that makes it a bit harder to see them, whether they're four-leaf or three-leaf or mixed up together. And so it is best to do this earlier in the morning, or at least in the morning. Later in the afternoon, and definitely late afternoon, it gets harder and harder and harder. It's not impossible, it's just a complicating factor. Of course, if you do it earlier in the morning, there may be a lot of dew and you may get wet crawling around looking for four-leaf clovers, but you know, kind of find your balance there. So late morning is probably going to work best for most people. There's also a difference among seasons. I found it a lot easier to look for clovers in the spring. The leaves tend to be bigger and they're just more obvious that way. Late summer or during the summer, that also works fairly well. In the fall, not quite so much. At least around here, our falls are dry, so we tend to have a little smaller clover. They tend to be closer to the ground, a little harder to see. And then winters, if you live in an area that is covered by snow, then obviously you're not going to find a whole lot of clovers. Another thing I learned is that if you find a four-leaf clover, the fourth leaf is actually a little smaller than the other three. And this will help you figure out if you have an actual four-leaf clover or not. Once again, for it to be official, and I'm not really sure who decided that this should be official or not, but the official species is the white clover. But there are a lot of other species that may look like clovers. For example, wood sorrel. If you go on the internet and you try to Google pictures of four-leaf clovers, a lot of them are actually wood sorrel. So if you should definitely make sure you know what a wood sorrel looks like and that you can distinguish between these species. There's also red clover. For some reason, red clover is not considered official, whereas the white clover is. I don't really know why that's the case, but there are different species of clovers. So be sure, go out and get a plant guide. There are a lot of them, and so be sure you're identifying the actual species. This project took a lot longer than I initially anticipated. I started off with the exhaustive search. That took about 3 days. Now, it wasn't 3 solid days, it was maybe a day and a half solid work. And then I moved on to other parts of the yard. But then I ran into a bit of a problem in that we hit a drought, and a lot of the leaves dried up around here. So I had to wait a couple of weeks, and then we had some rain. I got some more work done later in the fall by looking around. Still hadn't found one. Winter came. Couldn't really search during the winter around here. Too much snow, too cold. And it wasn't until the following spring that I was actually able to find a four-leaf clover. In retrospect, this helped me gauge how it is to search during different seasons, and I have a broader perspective. But that just took a really, really long time. One of the most common questions, or at least topics of discussion concerning four-leaf clovers, is what are the odds of finding a four-leaf clover? Or kind of put another way is, how many clovers do I have to look at before I find a four-leaf clover? The most common value that you see on the internet is 1 in 10,000. I don't know where this number came from, but it is out there, it is spread around, and it is the one that you're most likely to see. There was a study, it felt that the number was closer to 1 in 5,000. That's possible. In my particular circumstances, it was 1 in 16,866. So it was much higher than those other two values. But this then begs the question, why the difference? Why do you see different odds in different areas? And probably what you're thinking is, what can I expect in my particular yard or park or wherever it is that you may be looking for four-leaf clovers? And the answer has to do with statistics and some properties of statistics, namely that statistics are only really accurate with an infinite amount of data. Now, you're not going to have an infinite number of clovers to look at, but the point is, the more data you have, the more likely you are to converge on an accurate or true value. That is what the actual odds are. But until then, as you look in different clover patches and add more and more data, you will probably have different odds in each clover patch, with the average among these patches you could basically consider a best guess of the overall accurate odds. Now, for example, and to exemplify this, let's say that in one patch the odds of finding a four-leaf clover are 1 in 1,000. Go to a second patch, the odds there very well could be 1 in 15,000. Go to a third patch and the odds are going to be 1 in 5,000. If you take the average of all of these patches, you will see that the odds are then 1 in 7,000, which is probably getting closer to the true value. However, what is the situation in your particular yard? Are you closer to the 1 in 1,000, 1 in 15,000? And unfortunately, you will not know until you actually go out there and look. There is, however, another complicating factor. Statistics also assume that each observation is independent. And in this case, people usually think that each observation would be either a 3 or 4-leaf clover, and that each one of these is then independent. However, that is not true. As you can see in this image, each clover plant actually sends out a bunch of runners, those long tendrils, and along each of these runners there are many different leaf clusters that can have either 3 or 4 leaves. Because this is one plant, these clusters are not independent because they have the same genetic makeup. And if the genetic makeup predisposes a plant to produce 4-leaf clovers, then you're more likely to find more 4-leaf clovers associated with this particular plant. And if the genetic makeup does not predispose a plant to make 4-leaf clovers, that is, to make 3-leaf clovers, then you are most likely to find a bunch of 3-leaf clovers. So that's when you hear stories about people going into their backyard and in 5 minutes they find 24-leaf clovers. It's because they're probably looking at one plant that has this particular genetic makeup and that is likely to produce the 4 leaves. And if you don't have this particular plant or plants related to this, then you are less likely to see the 4 leaves. And that certainly turned out to be the case in my experience, in that I looked through the entire yard before finding a 4-leaf clover in one particular area. But then a few days later, I found another 4-leaf clover in the same general area. And it may very well have been part of the same plant, or it could have been related to the plant. And to drive this point even further, as I was editing this video, I went back to the same place and I have just found a third 4-leaf clover, once again in the same general area. So it is probably either of the same plant or a descendant of the same plant. I have not found 4-leaf clovers anyplace else in the yard. Another question people have going into a project like this is, how much area do I need with clovers to have a reasonable chance of finding a 4-leaf clover? In my particular instance, I ended up examining 130 square feet of my yard, which comes out to roughly 11 feet by 11 feet. But keep in mind that one section of that I did a very exhaustive search. In my yard, when I was doing the scanning method, I was averaging around 73 clovers per square foot. Now keep in mind the majority of my yard has 0 clover. And so I was focusing those efforts on parts of the yards that actually had clovers in it. And so those particular areas that had clovers, it was around 73 clovers per square foot. If you think that the odds are around 1 in 5,000 of finding a four-leaf clover, then you would need to search 69 square feet in order to find a four-leaf clover. If you think the odds are closer to 1 in 10,000 and the clover density is 73 clovers per square foot, then you're going to have to search around 137 square feet of yard, which is around 12 feet by 12 feet. So I am going to have one more video in this series, and I'll put a link in the description so that you can go to that, click on that and go to that. And in this final video in this particular series of Do Four-Leaf Clovers Really Exist, I'm actually going to make a memento or souvenir of the four-leaf clover that I found. It's a DIY project. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out after this video. And once again, as always, have fun exploring nature.